Hi, everybody, and welcome on into another great Facebook Live that we have here for you today. I am Andi Petrillo, the host, and also host over at CBC Sports. And today it's about the future of women's sports. And of course, we always do two panels. Kicking things off, I have three incredible athletes with me here today. Charity Williams, rugby sevens, Olympic bronze medalist from the 2016 Rio Games. I also have Laura Stacey, hockey player, two-time world medalist, and Olympic silver medalist at the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics. And then Claire Eccles, baseball player, pitcher in particular, 2015 Pan Am silver medalist and 2016 World Cup silver medalist. So very decorated. All three of you have been around for quite some time. So we're going to dive into the future of women's sport, but I find can't do that unless you look at the past and also understand experiences and why certain topics are being discussed. So Charity, I'll begin with you because I know with rugby sevens on the HSBC tour, a lot, especially last year, women's events and men's events were being held at the same place on the same weekend. But if you can just take us through your experience, what have you noticed as far as inequality when it comes to coverage and perhaps access to the women and the men's sports, or maybe the strides that you've also seen in your sport in particular?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me today. Last year was a huge year for women's rugby. Like you said, we were paired a lot with the men's tournaments, which meant there was bigger crowds. We had the same amount of coverage as the men got, and we even had our pay elevated as well, being in those tournaments. But it has taken a long time. I've been on the team for 8 years, and that was the most amount of coverage I had gotten as a female athlete representing Team Canada. So yeah, it was great, but my experience has always been that just within the media, we're not seeing even sometimes our own, less now, but in the past, our own media, our own team not covering us as much as they covered the men, us being kind of pushed aside and cast aside often, and even being the only, like, the women's team was the only team representing Canada at the Olympics, and even then there was a lot of there's a lot going on in what the men were doing and what they're doing at home and this, that, or whatever, and we had a lot of coverage, and like it was obviously focused more on us as the women's team, but even in that sense we still felt like we still felt that there would have been more coverage, more attention if it were the men's team instead of us in that position at the Olympics. So it's been a hard journey. We've gotten to a place where I think like we can definitely go elevate and go higher, but we have a lot of great athletes on my team who have been advocating so much for us as female athletes. So it's been quite a journey.
Well, you brought up something. I just wrote it down because I want to get back to it. Internal help from your own federations, because no one's going to advertise you or pat you on the back more so than your own people. And if they're not doing that, then you kind of wonder if you're stumbling out of the starting blocks, right out of the gate there. So I do want to get back to that. But I'll come to you, Laura. Obviously, hockey is a sport that so many people love here, but we also know the struggles that women, have also had to be just treated fairly as professional athletes, hence the formation of the PWHPA. What have been your experiences as well in the past and maybe even current in seeing how you've been treated differently and, kind of maybe have there been certain strides as well that have been taken to rectify that?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me as well. But I think you made a great point when, in order to look at the future and the growth of women's sports, you got to look at the past. And to be honest, when I started playing hockey, I played boys hockey. That's all there was. There was not too many women's hockey or girls hockey teams in my area or even in the surrounding area that I could play on. So I had to be that only girl playing a boy sport. And to be honest, I loved it. That's all I knew. They were my family. They were my brothers. And we were such a close group, and it didn't start changing until I started growing up and getting older and realizing what it really meant growing up, only having the opportunity to play with the boys. And so kind of looking at that past to see where it is now, I do think there has been a tremendous amount of growth in women's hockey specifically. But obviously we're not necessarily satisfied with just sticking with that status quo and being okay with the growth that's happened and not pushing for more. And I think that's the big next step is we realized kind of all the pioneers who've come before us, like the Jana Heffers, the Kathy Campbells, the Carolina Ouellettes. They've paved the way so that now we can have girls hockey playing not necessarily with the boys. If they want to, they can, but there are way more organizations and groups and opportunities for young girls to at least get started in the game. And I think that's our next step, is pushing for more. Not only do we want them in the game, but we want them dreaming to have the opportunity to play professional hockey, and not just, hey, the Olympics. And yes, the Olympics is an amazing dream, and it was mine 100%, and it still is. But I do think we can push for more. Why can't a little girl dream of playing in the Olympics, but also playing for her professional women's hockey team in the city that she lives in? For example, the Toronto Maple Leafs of women's hockey, or whatever it is. And no longer should they have to just wish to play in the NHL. I think that's what we're really pushing for right now. I think that's why the PWHPA was started, and giving those little girls who are now getting the chance to play more, giving them a vision, a dream. If they can see it, they can dream it, and they can be it. And I think that's what we're really trying to kind of push for, is to make that next step of not only salaries playing the game you love, but also a professional environment, rinks, physiotherapists, everything that the male athletes get. Obviously, we're not expecting the salaries right away of our male counterparts. And I don't think it is a he versus she or anything like that. It's just pushing the game further and asking for more than we have right now. And I think we're definitely taking steps forward, but it's taken the last few years specifically. I think it does take 2 steps back to go that 3-4 more steps forward.
I like that you bring up the point as well of just keep pushing for more and asking for more, because I think for so long, people will always say, well, you got a little crumb. Why aren't you happy with that? And I think that's where a lot of women as well kind of put the foot down and say, well, we're kind of done with the crumbs, right? When we know that, we are athletes that can definitely put on a show as well and make careers out of this, which is what a lot of people would love to see. If I come to you now, Claire, you are actually the first woman to pitch in the West Coast League, a men's league, Victoria Harbour Cats. Take us through your experience in the world of baseball. And I wonder, I'm sure there was a ton of support, but was there also a lot of pushback? Because that was just back in 2017. I'm curious how that experience was for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me as well. I've been playing baseball since I was 5, and like Laura, I grew up playing with only boys. I think there was probably about 10 other girls in my league at the time, and by the time I was 9 years old, there was 2 of us left. So I think I was very used to only playing with girls, and when I had gotten with boys, and when I had gotten to high school, I had to switch over because, there's baseball, and that's predominantly a men's sport. And then there's softball, which is known as like the women's counterpart to baseball. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity in terms of baseball for women, and there still isn't. But I was lucky enough to have the chance to go play in Victoria. It was an amazing opportunity, and I loved the guys that I played with. But of course, you wish that the girls could all share that same experience. Now there's a bunch of girls coming up who we just have, like Marika Lisick, who plays in the States in the NCAA team for Div 3. A girl named Allie Schroeder, who is from BC, who also just signed to be the first woman in the league, and she is playing in Nanaimo. So, just getting more opportunities. But I mean, at the moment, it's mainly a men's sport. When we tell people that we're playing baseball, they correct us and say, don't you mean softball? So as much as I loved softball, and I played softball as well, we are looking for more and more opportunities for women in baseball. And I had a lot of support, I'd say, in terms of me playing with the Harbour Cats. But of course, I remember there was a YouTube video that went out, and a lot of the comments, were like, she should be in the kitchen, which is what we've all probably heard before. But I feel like it's kind of time to stop that narrative of girls in baseball, or girls in any sport for that matter.
Yeah, just such an antiquated, they should be in the kitchen. I'm like, yeah, I'm in the kitchen. I cook well and I can play sports. Like, what's your point? I just absolutely hate that one with a passion, because it also makes no sense to me anymore. But Charity, I want to come back to you because I do want to ask, where do we see here? So again, the whole theme is future of women's sports, and we'll get into media coverage because we have discussed that before. But you brought up something that kind of made a light bulb go off for me, is your own federation. Do you feel it starts there a lot of times? Like whether it's the CEO of that federation, right down to the intern who runs the social media account, because that matters. That's how you reached the fan base, right? Is what you're putting out on Instagram and Twitter and social, and right down to how are you marketing, who's on the posters as well. If you're not going to champion your own athletes, you almost wonder why anyone else should care, right? So do you feel there needs to be more responsibility as well from federations to pay more attention as well to the women?
Yes, 100%. Our team in particular has come a long way with our own support from our federation with India, and we were lucky enough to hire some new staff, and they've definitely been really acknowledging us and showing our potential and who we are as athletes and as people on our social media channels, and really pushing that. But there can definitely always be more, and I think it does start, everything really starts at home, starts at your foundation, starts where you play, where you feel most comfortable, and it starts in your city. And there's so many times Rugby Canada is based in Victoria, also known as the Kwangan Territories, and there are so many folks who don't even know that we train in Victoria. They don't know that there's a national team. They don't know that we are Olympians. They don't know who we are, but everybody knows the men's side. And people constantly come up, when I say, oh, I play rugby, they're like, oh, like what university do you play for? What club do you play for? And I'm sitting here like, I've been to the Olympics. I play for Team Canada. And Victoria is a small place, and nobody has any idea. And I think that really boils down to how much value they put on to us, and how much they think that we can bring in for them. And sometimes I feel like folks for some reason don't think that we can garner that much attention or bring in revenue or whatever, but that's so not the case. It's just that people don't know. And I think if people knew, in my case, in rugby, that we were there, people would watch, they would show up to the games, they would tune in, they would buy the passes, and and it's, I think it's always accessibility. If you know, then you want to see, but if you don't know, then we're just a university team at that point, which is fine.
Yeah. Well, you're an Olympic medalist, but you're right. You're part of the national program. And again, it's so true when people say, well, they won't come out to see you. Well, do they even know we exist? Or they won't watch you on TV. Well, did you put me on TV? Right? It's kind of this, the horse and the cart type of thing. And Laura, when I come to you with hockey, we did see that. I mean, the PWHPA, I know CBC Sports obviously has a deal as well in airing that digitally. We just saw the NWHL have their Isabel Cup put on NBC and getting that attention as well. So how key is it for media executives, again, when they're looking at their programming, to say there has to be a spot here for women? There just has to be, because it seems like it's like a comfortable shoe just to say, well, the men are going to take up the entire program here, right? Like, how key is it to switch that type of thinking?
Oh, I think it's huge. And I think it's the same thing as the time that the events are put on too. A female event is not going to be watched if it's in the middle of a Wednesday when everybody's working. And I think it is obviously a little bit of a chicken and egg, and it's difficult. It is a difficult conversation, but I think it's been very obvious as of late that people do want to invest. People do want to watch women's sports. I think for us as women's hockey players, we see it every single Olympics, the women's final, even the games throughout the preliminary round at the Olympics. everybody's watching. The numbers are huge. And then through the 3 years in between, it's nobody exists anymore. They don't know where we're playing. They don't know where we are because it's not on TV. It's not, we don't necessarily have a league that everybody can watch. And I think it is very obvious that these ratings are going up and people actually do want to watch women's sports and women's hockey. I mean, with the Baylor and UConn game the other day and the Final Four, I think that's a huge story. And it just shows that women's sports are valued. Women's sports are popular, and people do want to watch it if people are given the opportunity to do so, especially at a great time when everybody is already watching sports. And I think it's really growing, and I do hope that that media attention continues to push forward, because I think that is a huge difference maker in the difference between a successful league for us and not, and a successful women's sport or not. And I think it is definitely pushing forward. And as we see, like, a lot of stuff is starting to be aired. And I think the best part about it is that it's also being watched.
It really is. When you look at the numbers, there has been growth whenever you put women's games on TV. And here's the thing. I always say to people, are they going to be the same numbers as the men? Well, of course not. It's going to take some time, just as it took the men time to even get to there. And the reason why people watch, if I were to be a psychologist here, 101, they watch as well because they know who the athletes are. So there's a connection there. There's a storyline to follow. And therein lies the difference. So the more you start to share the stories of female athletes, then you start to generate the interest. So if I get to know a little bit more about Claire Eccles, you're no longer just a woman pitching. You're Claire, here's your story. Oh, now I want to see how she's going to do in this game. So it's storytelling, and a lot of that falls on the shoulders of both the federation and the media to share those stories. And then that's how the fans start to generate some interest. But I wonder, Claire, if we look at, so we know everyone, but especially the sports industry and the media industry really had to find ways to adapt during COVID. Was there anything in particular that you saw in this past year with the way women's sports was covered that you actually would like to see move forward? You know, did you see that there, again, were certain things and certain strides that were made that you're like, yep, this actually is something that should continue to be implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media has been a huge thing, you know, just even with the whole NCAA issue. Sedona Prince, from Oregon, her social media presence has really, I think, helped even the numbers for the women's basketball tournament. And I think giving women that platform and having them be more viewed and seen, and the Gist, for example, as well, having those kind of platforms that broadcast more of what's going on in women's sports helps everyone see more of what's going on. Because, you know, like with baseball, we're very much, like, we're not an Olympic sport. It's really hard to get coverage. We have the World Cup every 2 years, but I feel like that's not so known. But having all these platforms come about that really just showcase and put a spotlight on women's sports is something that could really help grow everything else.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think, that's such a great point. So sometimes social media can be a nuisance. I'm sure we can all have our piece on that as well. But at the same time, Charity, it was that exposure of these dinky little dumbbells for the women at the NCAA tournament and this like state-of-the-art gym for the men, which, you know, shameful because Title IX is an NCAA rule. Like, they actually have a rule about treating both genders equally. They broke the rule they wrote. So, but that's neither here nor there. But is that also part of it? Like, do you almost feel like we have the power a little bit when you are able to expose that to kind of force the hand of these federations to say enough is enough? Because it's not new. She just posted it this year, but this has clearly been going on for years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like all these things coming out, you know, this past year, none of it is new. And with everything, with social justice, with how women are treated, with how people of color are treated, none of it is new. But for some reason, not for some reason, because of COVID and because everyone is at home, social media is really all you have to stay connected with people to see what's going on in the world, and to really just like finally kind of position yourself in society and think, okay, this is what's happening. Like, this is what I need to be in tune with. So I think right now it's such a big time right now to expose everything that's happening in our environments, because social media is a way to get things done at this point, I think. And you know, like I said, it's always been happening. We've always been kind of been treated this way, but now people are listening, and now people are watching, and everyone's watching. And now that everybody is watching, you can't continue to do the same thing. You can't continue to oppress the same way. So yeah, I think social media is such a huge advantage right now, and we should use it to the fullest extent. Yeah, like TikTok, Instagram videos, all of those things. It just seems so minuscule, and it seems like, you know, it's like it's just a couple of videos. It's like 20 seconds, but it literally has changed, you know, those women's experience at in March Madness. Like that video has changed the experience for them. You know, people retweeting things, everything. So yeah, I think it's so powerful, and I think we should tap into it as much as we can.
Well, because I think it also helps people sitting at home who don't understand, again, why women's sport is thriving, because you start to see the inequality, the inequity, and you start to realize, oh, women are not even starting at the same start line as men. They're actually 100 feet behind, and they have all this space to, you know, to catch up. And it's like, well, what do you mean the women can't perform the same as the men? Well, Exhibit A, check out the facility. Check out the food, right? Like check out the advertising, the marketing, everything is already starting from 100 feet behind or a disadvantage. But Laura, you know, history was made on March 24th, excuse me. We've seen it before in hockey, but now we see it at the Raptors game with an all-female crew. I'm wondering, you know, how do we make sure that a day like that isn't a token day? Because tokenism to me leads to stagnation. How do we make that a stepping stone day? Because, I mean, we have so many men, incredible men, especially in this country, because hockey's the #1 sport, who cover the sport. How do we get more female voices in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, I mean, I'm a huge Raptors fan, so I love to see that. But to be honest, I think kind of as Charity mentioned, like, I think making our footprint now and doing whatever we can with social media, with these events taking place of an all-female crew in any sport. I think if we do this today as much as we can, and we try and leave our impact as people in the game today, to be honest, whether it impacts us right now or not, I think it'll have an even bigger impact on the future generations to come. And I saw so many tweets and pictures, and the Leafs, I watched the Leafs a lot. I'm also a big Leafs fan. But they did their next gen game the other day too. And just seeing those kids and the impact, there was a little girl I saw tweeting, and just seeing their impact, watching an all-female crew, watching young girls see this, even if it has no impact on us today in our sports, the impact that it's going to have in years to come is huge. And I think that's all we can ask of, and that's all we can try and leave behind for the next generation. And I think that first time in the NBA game hopefully will spark another time just down the road. And to be honest, with the young generations of females coming up aspiring to be like that, I don't see it not happening more often with giving girls the opportunity at a young age to see it. And women's hockey, you're right. We've been really lucky to have such strong female presence with the Cassie Campbells and tons of Jennifer Botterill, like live commenting, and having an analyst approach to a men's game is amazing. And I think it is really pushing not only our sport forward, but women in general forward. And it's amazing to see the remarks and the pictures of young girls seeing this, because I wish when I was a little girl, I had that opportunity to see it and be like, hey, one day I want to be on that TV. I want to be performing at the Olympics. I want to be an analyst on a women's hockey game or a men's basketball game, whatever it is. I think no matter what sport, no matter what gender, I do think you should have the opportunity to do what you're best at and what you're passionate about. And I think continuously pushing these boundaries, like we said, whether it's social media, whether it's an all-female crew, the more often we can do it now and open the eyes of young girls, the future is just going to benefit from it.
Well, and that's just so key, future, because I mean, all three of you still currently play, and I wish you long, happy, successful careers. But when the time comes to retire, it's like, what's next? So Claire, I wonder, you know, what was the reaction even in the baseball community when you saw Kim Ng become the first GM, right, in Major League Baseball. And then, yes, now knowing that when you retire from your game, there's a real good chance that you can be an analyst, and not just in the women's game, but on the men's game as well. So that's also about the future as well. So I'm just curious, Claire, like, what was the reaction to Kim Ng, and just how important is it to see more women, not just covering women's sports, but men's sports as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a very exciting and amazing thing that happened with Kim Ng. Like, you know, as you said, there's a lot of tokens, and we maybe eventually want to get to that stage where it's not just the first, there's multiple people that follow. And like, I got that first opportunity as well, but I would love to see a younger girl get that same opportunity down the road to play in summer ball, maybe play with the Victoria Harbour Cats again. Like, I know that firsts are amazing and it's a step, but we want to keep going with that. And we want to see women in these power positions. We want to have those women who we can look up to as role models. And I know that's how big that was for me when I was young. And I know that I got to play a part in that for a lot of young girls. And I hope that just continues along the way, because yeah, more and more women who are in those power positions means that, you know, we're getting more and more opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. I can't believe that time is flying by here, but I just want everyone, before we go, I'll come to you, Charity. Just tell people, we got a lot of people right now watching, where can they find you in this coming year? Because yes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, fingers crossed, coming out of COVID. Just where can people find you? What are you going to be up to this year? Tokyo's coming up.
Yes, so we are currently in Dubai right now on our first tournament back since the start of this crazy pandemic, training for Tokyo. We're having like an invitational tournament with a bunch of other teams. And geez, I guess you can find me personally on Instagram. But yeah, we are preparing for Tokyo, and our team, I think, has, you know, a very, very strong chance of bringing home that gold medal. So watch out for us.
Love it. Laura, where can people find you as well? What are you up to this year?
Well, we have a selection camp coming up for the World Championships. The World Championships are actually in Halifax this year, so on home soil, which is pretty amazing. It was supposed to be there last year, but obviously with the pandemic and everything happened, it was pushed to this May. So that's the most upcoming event. Leave for Halifax for a selection camp and that kind of stuff on April 14th, so relatively soon. And then hopefully there will be a Canadian PWHPA event sometime this year, maybe following the World Championships. We're not 100% sure yet, but the PWHPA is putting in a lot of effort to try and make that happen. Obviously, there's a lot of COVID regulations in Canada, but that would be the goal. So keep looking out for a showcase with the Canadian PWHPA girls.
Yeah, fingers crossed. It was so great to see them at Madison Square Gardens and then Chicago as well, hosting the game. So come on, let's get one here in Canada. Claire, what does this year look like for you?
I mean, considering that all the baseball girls are spread across the country, I'm just going to keep training. We connect through Zoom. That's pretty much the only way that we keep in contact with the women's baseball pool. So yeah, just working out and practicing. And then I'm not too sure what I'm going to do with myself. I've applied to a school in Ontario for CMCC, chiropractic college. And I have an interview for that. So maybe I'll be in Ontario in September. We'll see.
We'll keep our fingers crossed for you. Well, thank you so much. Honestly, some great stuff there. I really appreciate all of you taking the time. Charity Williams, rugby sevens, Laura Stacey, hockey player, Claire Eccles, pitcher in baseball. Thank you to the three of you, and thank you to everyone who's been tuning in. We're still going here. We have two other guests who are going to be joining me now as we say goodbye to our athletes. We're going to be bringing in two very special women as well, as we talk about getting more attention to the women's game, as we also talk about the future of women's sport. We're going to be bringing in now Catherine Henderson, CEO of Curling Canada, and JC DeHoop, co-founder of The Gist, that just got a shout out in that first panel there. Thank you to both of you for joining us today. How are you doing, JC?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, it's a nice day. The sun is shining. I'm in Collingwood, Ontario, so Feeling good on this Wednesday.
Yeah, a little gloomy here in Toronto. Catherine, where are you?
I'm in Toronto. I'm in the east end of Toronto in the beaches area. And JC, I want to let you know every morning when I get up, I look for the gist. That's my go-to right now.
Love hearing that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Catherine.
Yeah.
You know, we were just talking about more curling coverage too in our newsletter. The Canadians have been loving whenever we're mentioning curling. So
good.
Keep an eye out for more of that to come.
Great.
Canadians love their curling. I can tell you whenever we show it on CBC, those viewership numbers definitely go up and up. But let's start, obviously, then, JC, with you, because, you know, the future of women's sport, we just had that conversation about social media presence as well for athletes. But then, obviously, this platform, like the GIST, being able to pull from them and really give everyone this pool that we can all go to. Because if you don't follow 50 athletes, it doesn't matter. It's almost like we rely on you to say, hey, here's the top story. This is what's going on in women's sport. What were the first conversations like when you got something like this going?
When we got the GIST going?
Mm-hmm.
It was, I mean, so I'm one of 3 co-founders, and myself, Rosalind, and Ellen, we were all friends from university, and we're all working in financial services before we launched the GIST. So really the need for the GIST came from our own personal experiences, and, you know, how all 3 of us grew up playing every single sport, but that didn't really translate to being a sports fan, and how I think in a financial services, very male dominated, very corporate kind of environment, that, you know, that boys club that sports can be was really exacerbated in that kind of environment. And we were really sick of it. And we wanted to create something that was the exact opposite of that, something that made sports feel just much more accessible and inclusive to all sports fans. And a huge part of that, of course, has been our coverage of women's sports, female athletes, and really elevating their voices. That's been a huge part of what's differentiated the GIST from day one. We cover what's going on in men's professional sports as well. But really having that equal coverage, if not, we have a lot more coverage actually on the women's side a lot of the time, but also that female perspective and voice in the kind of sports media landscape was something that us as fans really felt like was missing, and was part of the reason why sports was kind of disenfranchising to us a lot of the time. So really elevating those athletes' voices, and particularly female athletes' voices, has been a huge part of our social strategy, but really all of our content across our newsletter as well.
And it's just so common sense to me, because, you know, all the networks, you know, all they really do is talk about getting viewership and how do we increase viewership. Well, if you don't pay attention to like the other 50% of your population there, I mean, it's kind of obvious that your viewership isn't going to go up. So maybe you want to bring in the female voice and create that connection. Catherine, something else that was brought up as well was, you know, the federations themselves and the responsibility that lands on their shoulders to promote their own athletes. What has Curling Canada done as well to make sure that there is that equal coverage between men and women?
Sure. Well, there is equal coverage actually between men and women in curling. We're one of the few sports that actually has, you know, that's being played and broadcast and our big sport properties. One of the really interesting things that happened over when I first arrived, I mean, curling has been played by men and women for many, many, many years in Canada. It's kind of one of those Canada sports stories, but the women's game, I would say, was kind of on the cusp of being equal to the men's game. And I looked at it on one hand as a female and a female sport executive and said, I think there's something we can do with this. I also looked at it as just a business executive and said, why would I not want 2 large sport properties if I could have 2 large sport properties? You know, I have a Briar and a Scotties Tournament of Hearts. Let's kind of diversify our risk a little bit here. So a couple of things that we did is we said, you know, the Tim Hortons Briar is a very, very large event. It attracts millions of people watch it. About 40% of Canadians, you know, watch it at least a few times during the course of it. And we said, so what can we do to make sure that the women's game is growing? And so, you know, there's some very deliberate things you can do as a marketer, just in terms of promoting and making sure that you're highlighting the athletes and you're telling their stories a little bit more. And we really did at one point, I guess it was last year, we announced that we were also equalizing the prize pool. So we have we have relatively large for a national sport organization, large prize pools, and we equalized them, and we made that announcement, and it was the easiest thing in the world to do. And it was easy because not only was it the right thing to do, because they're working just as hard and they're demonstrating just as much skill, but also the business had grown to be exact same size. So at that point, you're saying, this isn't, I'm not trying to score political points here, folks. I've got two really large businesses, and maybe so should you.
Mm-hmm. Hey, listen, if Rachel Homan can go out there and what was she, 7-8 months pregnant? Like, come on, women are working
So impressive.
for that money. Like, don't even. So pretty incredible there. But so, JC, I am wondering, as I'm even seeing some comments come in, it's almost like now everyone wants more, right? Like, obviously, there's such a huge appreciation for the coverage. Yeah. Is there one, are you noticing people demanding coverage of a certain sport when it comes to women at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. We are kind of keeping our finger on the pulse all the time of how, just kind of consumption habits are changing with our gisters and different trends and just what kind of coverage they're most interested in. And we find, and so we're on both sides of the border. We have our Canadian newsletter as well as our US newsletter, and our American audience and our Canadian audience, which are very different, which we thought it would be different, but it's like really quite different, which has been really cool to see. On the Canadian side in particular, I already mentioned curling has been, and we kind of knew that it would be an area that our gisters were really interested in. And I think stars like Rachel Homan have been a huge part of that. And curling it feels like it's a little bit of a more accessible sport than some other Olympic sports too. So curling's definitely been up there. So kind of like the classic Canadian sports. I mean, hockey, of course, has been a huge part of our coverage, especially what's going on the women's side and the progress that's being made over the past few years. But what's interesting too is that with our gisters, which, as you would imagine, skews pretty female, 85% of our community identify as female. There's a ton of interest in what we kind of call the Olympic sports, and we don't really refer to them as niche sports because a lot of them aren't. But there is such an interest in trampoline or gymnastics. Volleyball's actually been huge too, and just a lot of those sports that, I mean, from a CBC perspective, that get a ton of coverage on CBC, but might not be considered kind of those mainstream, big four kind of leagues. But our audience is always super engaged and really interested in those stories, and particularly I think the female athlete side of things too. And just like, kind of telling those stories. I think it helps also that we're in an Olympic year. So people are kind of starting to think about what's going to be happening at Tokyo, and then Beijing's going to be right around the corner. But it's been really cool to see that when you kind of diversify the fan base, diversify the audience, it also means diversifying the sports that audiences are interested in.
So here's something that, I want to get into, and I believe it was Mary Jo who wrote something here, and I completely understand where she's coming from. But at the same time, I also see that this is where the world of broadcasting is going. And I know, Catherine, you probably don't run into this because, again, curling is such a popular sport that you probably do have, 2-3 major, between CBC, TSN, Sportsnet, no problem fighting for the curling rights, to air those. But in order to get more sports out there and accessible to people, these digital platforms are coming on board, from DAZN to Media Pro. And I know Mary Jo says, I don't put them on streaming services that you have to pay for. But I mean, what are the conversations going on internally with federations when you do want more of your product out there? You kind of need more space. And sometimes that's where it happens, is on those digital platforms.
Yeah. I mean, I see digital and, streaming and over the top, all that stuff. It's just a huge opportunity for sport. I mean, sport, I think sport is one of those things, like the more you put out there, the more it's going to get consumed. I think we have to stop thinking about sport purely in terms of, just sort of broadcast audiences, over the air or cable audiences, because I was actually in an OTT conference, and we were talking about, it was a goal that was scored. It was a soccer goal that was scored, and the numbers were pretty astounding. And it was just a really, really well scored goal. It was in the UK, and 3 million people in the UK watched it on television, and 3 billion people in the world downloaded it and watched it on some form of social media. And so, I think, you can really kind of spread things around if you start making sure that you are actively engaging where people are, I would say a lot of their consumption habits are quite different, and the sport has got to adapt to them, not the other way around. I'm not sure that I can teach a whole generation of people to sit down and watch us for 3 hours at a time. I know that there are some people that will do that, but if I want more, I've got to be able to show highlight packages. I've got to be able to show really cool shots. I've got to be able to, pull them in and have them look at things on second screens and want to have conversations with us. And that's consuming sport. I mean, it's fun, and it brings us together, and it makes us feel like we're part of a community. So I couldn't agree with you more. We just have to figure out how to take traditional sports and create maybe a tapas of ways of eating them.
Yeah. And I guess that's where the challenge is too, JC, when you look at it, because you just talked about the consumption and maybe sports of interest are just completely different between Canadians and Americans, even though we're so close in so many other ways, right? Just the order of sport that we're interested in is different, but our population is also, completely different. So where you have like 101, regional and cable stations in the States, you don't really have that here in Canada. Which is why, you kind of have a monopoly when it comes to sports. So then these other little digital platforms come on in, whether it be Twitch, DAZN and Media Pro, kind of where is your thinking as far as that helping the women's game grow when those are platforms that are at least making the women's game available, whereas on the big networks, they're not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we love it. I think that it is super important just that women's sports in particular are just more accessible. Like that is a huge part of the equation. I totally agree with you, Catherine, where like something that we know about our audience too, which skews very female and very millennial as well, is like they're not watching games end to end. And a lot of them are really avid fans and still aren't going to be watching even, like their favorite hockey team, they're not watching the games. So having that kind of, and you mentioned like tapas, or it's kind of like these ancillary digital platforms, and whether it's highlights and it's like through socials, or whether it's through a newsletter like ours or what have you, that keep you up to date on everything that's going on, we've found is what the kind of millennial Gen Z demographic has been super interested in, and that there just hasn't been a ton of appetite to watch every game, but there is so much interest in kind of the drama and all the storylines surrounding those games. And so that's what we really try to focus on. But I think, being able, I think especially for women's sports as they're growing, and like, the NWHL deal with Twitch or what have you, like wherever there are opportunities to watch, it is really important. It does make a difference. Like we've found that with, again, with having both American and Canadian audiences, just the fact that our Canadian audience can't watch the NWSL or the WNBA very readily. It's just, there just isn't a fan base. Like it really is difficult to generate a real interest in those sports, in those athletes, even though as Canadians, we still see so much American media just without being able to really watch the games and get an understanding of the game too, and how it is different and how awesome it is, and understanding that environment and everything around it. I do think that that's a huge step, and it's very important to kind of growing all of these women's sports overall.
Yeah, I find that so fascinating. And you would have a lot of those numbers, JC, just on, what are people consuming? How are they doing it? And just in so many ways, how different we are from the United States, but yet so similar. Catherine, we know mixed doubles made its Olympic appearance 2018. Canada took the gold. Thank you very much, Caitlin Laws and John Morris. How much do you think that also helps when it comes to equality, that the Olympics are also starting to introduce more of these mixed sports, mixed team sports? And if I'm not mistaken, I want to say it's Beijing will be the closest to 50-50 participation as well. It is.
Yeah, I was actually on a call. I sit on a board called WISE, Women in Sports and Events. I would encourage all of you to look it up, WISE Toronto. And we had the women of Team Canada. We had Jackie Ryan, Rosie McLennan, anyway, there was a bunch of them, Sandra Levy and Marnie McBean yesterday. And this team, I think it's about 49-51 women to men. I think mixed doubles is not just an incredibly interesting sport to watch. I think it's an incredibly important sport to include. And one of the reasons that, we've had men's and women's sports happen in the past, but it's often that men play one role and women play another role. Figure skating could be an example of something like that. So incredibly beautiful teamwork. In the case of mixed doubles, they're equal on the field. That they both have exactly the same role. Like they switch their roles back and forth, but for 50% of the time, one of them is calling the game and doing certain things, and then that switches. And so what you really get is an opportunity to truly understand the level of skill that both male and female athlete have on the field of play, and you can see it. Individual athletes may have, very developed skills in one area and rely on their partner for another. But in this particular game, you don't sort of see the men have one set of skills, strength, and the women have another set of skills, finesse. I'm making that up. But in this particular one, both of them have to be just really world class, Olympic class in order to play it well. And I love watching it because of that, because you forget at one point it's a man and a woman. You just see two incredible athletes representing Canada on the ice.
Love that. Sorry, I'll be muting very quickly if my dog decides to make an appearance here. So JC, I do want to ask you about the NCAA and again, the role that social media can play in exposing certain inequalities. And again, the athletes who I just had on before from Charity, Claire and Laura, they all agreed that sometimes when, the one good thing about social media is this ability to also show that there's something up here, right? And you kind of look at the athletes themselves having that social media presence. And how important do you think, their role, their power in their own platforms, but then the role you play, and maybe again putting it into one platform with the gist to kind of say, hey, let's, this is how we expose inequalities, and now let's try and move forward from it, right? It's not just about finger pointing; it's about finding solutions too.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think a huge thing when we're talking about inequality in sports too is that there are so many small aspects, such as just like the weight room, that aren't necessarily on people's radars. Is like that's an inequality that exists. I think people immediately go to equal pay, rightly so too. Is obviously a huge one, but don't necessarily factor in or think about, there's so many other factors that are contributing to these inequalities. We're always thinking about it from a business perspective and kind of seeing, it's just like just the dollars that are going into each side is frankly ridiculous. But it is so important and to leverage socials. I think especially just like videos and graphics, like, as we know, that's the kind of thing that can really take off. We'll write about something in the newsletter, and our newsletter has been such an amazing channel for building that relationship with our gisters, but for something to really take off, socials are the way to do that. And so people actually being able to see the side-by-side images or the side-by-side videos, and being able to see just like those other aspects of how the women's game in so many sports is just neglected and not given the attention that it deserves is super, super important. And even, again, it seems like something that would be relatively small, or not necessarily like a huge contentious point, but us covering everything that happened in March Madness over the last few weeks, like people were going off in the comments. Like it really is important to showcase that kind of thing side by side, so that people can feel really worked up about it, because that's really important too, is that I think that the passion and the desire to act needs to extend beyond people like us three who are already in this space and already really understand these inequalities that exist. It's so important for it to be beyond that, for male athletes to also be like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous, I need to comment or share or say something, is really important. I think socials are huge for that and are really important in telling that conversation.
So as we're getting set to emerge from COVID-19, oh my goodness, I hope that surface is like right there. Catherine, what would be your messaging as well, whether it's within the federation or again, because I really do, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but the proof is in the pudding, that curling really does give, that equal attention. And I see obviously that the way curling is loved in this country, people care more, about the men and the women's sport. What's the key messaging coming out of COVID, and also for your own federation, but also for other people who would be looking to help create more of that equal platform?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. That's kind of the $1 million question, isn't it? First of all, I would say for everybody, like sport is going to help us recover. I think it's kept us mentally, sort of in our games. It's something right now, and we're in the middle right now of a bubble. So we've got a whole hub city going on and a number of these big national events going on. So, I'd really encourage anyone that is to include sport as part of your own personal, recovery from your health and your community and economic recovery. I mean, sport's going to be a big part of it. In terms of the messages of curling, I could say to you a couple things is, first of all, I get to enjoy twice as many phenomenal athletes. I mean, I really do get the opportunity to spend lots of time with just these incredible human beings who do all kinds of wonderful things for us and make Canadians really proud. But I would say, as a business person, the other thing that I really stress to people is investing in your women's game is a really good business opportunity for you. And it does take some sort of, and sort of using the fact that the men's sport has grown to a certain size and is pulling in money. Yes. But like, don't you want more of that? If you're if you're a federation, if you're a business person, and then of course, it's just the right thing to do. When you're there, and we do something called Curling Day in Canada with TSN, and it's a show that we put on. But like pretty well everyone gets involved in it. I know Devin Haru tweets a lot about it, and Canadians from coast to coast to coast, really love our Curling Day in Canada. And this year, in a lot of the things that we were doing, we were talking about the women of curling, and really spending a lot of time with sort of the growth in the young women's game, and sort of featuring a lot of our young women. And I'll tell you, our audiences grew. I mean, we kind of shifted, and so this is a national audience of men and women, and we sort of shifted over to tell the story about women in curling. And we don't get a full female audience when we kind of talk about the sport writ large, but we show a lot of the female athletes. Our numbers just kept growing this year. So featuring, maybe the message that I'm trying to say is that, make women just such an integral part of your sport. You've got way more things to talk about. You've got way more interesting athletes to see. You've got more events that make you more money. And you've got just more people interested in what it is you have to say. And our women are so good that men are equally interested in how well they do as they are in the male athletes. So
yeah. Well, I mean, listen, you're bang on. It's the right thing to do, but at the same time, from marketing, storytelling,
yes.
bringing in more money. Hello, check. It all seems pretty common sense to me. JC, as someone who keeps your eye on the media, where do you also want to see women's sports go? So when we come out of COVID and, everything kind of seems like it's going back to normal as far as coverage and getting out there and fans in the stands and all that kind of stuff. How do you want to see women's sports treated?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know what? I think in this last year, we have seen a ton of momentum in the space. Like, I'm feeling very positive about what this next 6 months, next year, next 5 years, 10 years is going to look like for women's sports, even from when the GIST was founded in 2018 versus today in 2021. Just the conversations around explaining the premise of the GIST are so different. Like, we don't have to explain why we should exist anymore. It feels like something that, yeah, of course, there's going to be, a platform that's more dedicated to female voices and female athletes. It feels like that's a very natural next step. But in 2018, that honestly wasn't the case. And the conversations, around women's sports. And I like your point, Catherine, on the actual business opportunity of women in sport was at a very different place 2 years ago than it is today. I think that there is a lot of momentum right now around, this is a business opportunity. This isn't something that's philanthropic. Like, we're not a not-for-profit. Like, this isn't a charitable thing by any means. It's like, this is a real business opportunity. And when people start seeing it that way, then that's when things are going to change. And again, I think that there has been that shift in the last year in particular. I mean, I think this last year has just brought into focus and brought into a lot of perspective to things. There's been this incredible social justice movement that I think has really extended to just other areas as well. So it feels like the tides are moving in our favor in a lot of ways. I think coming out of COVID, there's a lot of changes that still are to be made. Like, there's still tons of progress that needs to happen. And that's, I won't even name, like, there's many things that still need to happen, but I do think that we've experienced this really big shift, and it does feel like there is some really positive momentum, and that there will be some really concrete changes that are happening over the next few years, which we're really excited for too.
Yeah. Listen, we all know, right? It's about the, networks getting on board and making sure that space is there for women. It's about sponsors and advertisers as well. Not saying, well, we'll only give money if it's the men, and kind of shutting the door right away when it comes to the women. There are a lot of people that need to get involved, because it's one thing to give lip service. It's another thing to now go, here's the product, and watch it grow. And, we give credit, obviously, to, Sonnet and Secret stepping up on the women's hockey side of things. And we're talking 7-digit figures, and that matters. So really appreciate that. Great stuff from the both of you. Really appreciate the insight, and obviously just, some of the opinions, and kind of moving forward, how we keep the conversation going and look for a brighter future ahead for women's sports. And speaking of Devin Haru, he's promised to take me out on the sheet. I have not curled. Can you believe
Oh, Andi. Okay,
I watched it, I covered it, but
you couldn't go out with someone better on there. I've never met a person so enthusiastic about it.
I'm a little scared.
Yeah,
I'm a little scared because he might go crazy coach on me.
Yeah.
But I am looking forward to hitting that sheet of ice with Devin when it comes to curling. So Catherine, thank you so much. JC, thank you so much. I do subscribe, and I love it every single day, waking up to that.
Thank you.
And thank you for being a part of this conversation, Canadian women in sport and the future of women's sport. Thank you to all of you who have tuned in. Thank you for your comments. We've been seeing them. They're fantastic. I wish we could go for another hour and even answer some of those questions, but really appreciate everyone for taking the time, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
Bye.